it's this subject all over again. It's a measure of common cause variation. But the question still remains, does variation stack up or average out? And in this case, when you go from one blue box to the next, each one is dependent on the one that came before. They're not independent, they're dependent. You have independent events, when you have dependent events, it changes the game completely. In fact, Goldratt's the one that coined this phrase, but the accumulation of fluctuations between dependent events is both a cause and an effect of variation. It's kind of like not being on time. When you're not on time, you don't average out and get on time later. If you're late for the first one, you're going to be even later here and even later here, and when it goes around, it gets worse and worse and worse. It just keeps getting later. You can't make up the time once you lose it. So it's a big subject, not very well understood. It comes back to this graph, which we already looked at, having to do with the variation and the difference in capacities and capabilities. You remember this, more capability means less variation, but the capacity is a completely different thing. It's just the average of what is the average capacity, but it's not the average. It's not the same thing as capability. So the one on the left has more capacity and capability, but if I dropped it down, it could have less capacity and still more capability. They're two different words. Now, I had to say that because I want to set up what I'm going to talk about. Let's take a simple, really simple, two-step process that has zero variation. Both average and peak capacity are 4 units. This thing can do 4 units a day, but it takes 2 days to do it because step 1 can put out 4 units, step 2 can put out 4 units, but it takes a cycle time of 1 day and a cycle time of another day. So on average, throughput is 4 units per day, and the average happens to be every day because there's no variation. There's 2 days of inventory in the system because it takes 4 and 4. It takes 2 days for the inventory to move through the system, a cycle time of 2 days. And work in process would be those 8 units. But really the important thing is there's no inventory stacked up between. There's no warehoused inventory between step 1 and step 2 because it just flows. So the cycle time, even though it's 2 days, the stacked up inventory is 0. The only inventory in the system is what's flowing, moving. Now let's take the same process, but this time we're going to raise the capacity to 5, but the average is going to still be 4. So in other words, both of these processes have a little variation. They either get a 3 or a 5. Get it? Now the question is, what's the throughput, and does inventory stack up or average out? And so we have to think about it. The first thing you do is you realize that I've just described a situation that has fairly low variation. And here's the way it works. You get the permutations. You can get a 3 and a 3, and 3 comes out. You can get a 3 and a 5, and 3 comes out. You can get a 5 and a 3, and I couldn't move but 3 out, so 2 stacked up right here. And if I do a 5 and a 5, that's dandy. You get 5 out. So let's average it out and see what happens. You get a 3, a 3, a 3. There's 3 ways to get a 3. One way to get a 5 adds up to 14 divided by 4. It's only 3.5. Throughput's only 3.5, and inventory stacked up 2 units, which is a half a day. And cycle time now has increased because it's 1 day here, 1 day here, and a half a day stacked up. My cycle time went up to 2.5. My inventory went up to 2. Throughput went down to 3.5. This is getting ugly, and it doesn't make sense. The capacity is actually higher, but the average capacity is the same, but the process capability is worse, and throughput went down, inventory stacked up, cycle time increased. This is not a pretty picture. Now we'll do the same thing with throw the dice. We'll have 7 units of capacity. But the average varies between 1 and 7, but the average is still 4. 7 and 1 is 8, divided by 2 is 4. You would think, but by now you already know that we got more variation, and the permutations are the same kind of math with different numbers. So this time it's 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 7 equals 10 divided by 4. Oh my gosh. Throughput went down to 2.5. Stacked up inventory went up to 1.5 days. You add that to the 2 days we already had. So now we got 3.5 days of cycle time, 6 days of stacked up inventory, and our throughput went from 4 all the way down to 2.5. So this is not a pretty picture. Now, to be fair about this, if I just did it one time, if I kept doing it and doing it and doing it over and over and over again, what's going to really happen? Is this throughput going to keep going down? Is inventory going to keep going up? Is cycle time going to keep going up? What's going to really happen? Is it going to average out, or is it going to keep stacking up? What's going to happen? Well, over time, because inventory stacks up, you'll have enough to pull through, and the throughput will actually approach 4. I'll show you that. But here's the ringer. Inventory and cycle time just keeps stacking up and continues to grow. It goes on forever until it is adjusted. And guess who adjusts it? Management. That's the beer game we're starting to talk about. When it goes up and stacks up, pretty soon somebody says stop, and we let it run out because we got too much. When we do that, the people further upstream in the supply chain take that to be a reduction in demand, and they lay off people, only to find out that it was just an adjustment in stacked up inventory. And when they ask to go back to normal flow, the people upstream say, oh my God, we've already shut the plant down for summer because we thought you guys didn't need it. So we set off the beer game. Here's what happens. When you do this thing over and over and over again, as a model I have, with the low variation on the left, that's this one, it starts out where the throughput goes down, just like I showed you, but very quickly it starts back up, and it approaches 4. Never gets there mathematically, but it gets real close. If you have higher variation, same thing happens. And by the way, it's a little bit, if I ran this model over and over again, every time it would never be the same. It would always be different. It's just like these iterative dissipative systems. They never repeat exactly, but they always have the same look. They always go down and work their way back to 4. But then let's talk about the other one.
Bob, can I interrupt for just a second? Because I'm kind of dumb and I don't want to miss something. Can you just review again where you showed that with low variation you get a big drop in throughput? I missed that somehow. I don't know, daydreaming about the laundry.
You're looking at this graph versus that graph.
Yeah.
Where did you? What I'm trying to say is, if I ran this again, ran the model again, it might not. It might go down that much. Because it has to do with how it's like the butterfly effect. It's wherever you start the program, wherever you start, out to so many decimal points, and then repeat it over and over and over again, it's going to take on a different shape, because it's kind of like when you roll the dice the first time, you may get bars, you may get snake eyes, you may get a 3, but over time it's going to approach something if it's independent. But when these things so what I'm trying to say, I could wear you out by showing you different green charts, but every time it's going to approach 4. But when I come down here, the more interesting part is when I move down and talk about the inventory and the cycle time. Inventory will always go up. And look at this, the scales are different. This is 25 and that's 60. So when the variation is greater, this thing is taken off steeper. It looks like they're about the same, but this scale is about twice as much. And so the inventory is stacking up, and it's growing, and it goes up and down because it surges through when it builds up, and it's like rolling the dice. Different things will go through in it, but over time it keeps stacking up, and when inventory stacks up, cycle time goes with it. So what happens is in the process, say you're third guy on the line, and your inventory is starting to look like that, you turn on the red light and say, stop, I can't handle anymore. I don't need any more inventory. The guy upstream says, well, I guess he doesn't need any more. You guys can go home early. And it happens too much. He says, well, hell, I'm going to lay off some of these people. And then all of a sudden, when he needs it again, it's too late. And we have what we call the beer game. And what's going on is we have common cause variation, stacking up inventory, creating the need for special cause adjustments, which set off and are confused with the demand, and the whole system goes out of sync. So we have what this is what's. Oh, I did that too fast.
But Bob, isn't this a push model rather than a pull model? In other words, just in time, the Ono's model would be a pull. You don't produce unless.
Well, it is a pull model because if I'm at the customer saying, give me what I need, and if the person above me doesn't have the capability, yeah, you're right, that it creates that. Yeah, pull model goes a long way to solving it, but it doesn't solve it without getting rid of variation. One of the last modules in this whole thing is what we call the smart order that addresses what you're talking about.
Yeah, this is Travis. I think what Bob's showing here, in my opinion, is a really good defense of why you can't fool yourself when you focus on flow. So people know that sub-optimization is bad. People know that sometimes someone's doing what they think is right, or what's right for someone within an organization might not be right for the overall organization. And focuses or metrics like cost are situations where you can try to reduce cost, but by focusing on cost, you actually don't reduce cost. Or productivity, by focusing on productivity, you reduce productivity. But
right.
this sort of defense, to me, is a technical defense to say that you have to take into consideration dependencies when you focus on flow. So you can't focus on flow and fool yourself into local improvements, but not global. Just by focusing on flow, it pulls you towards a more global focus. If a global focus is what we want, how do we get there? We don't get there by focusing on cost. We don't get there by focusing on productivity, et cetera, et cetera. But if we focus on flow, it's going to pull us in the direction of a more global focus because we have to, because it takes into consideration the dependencies.
Right, and you need. That's exactly right. And what we typically do when we're in the company circle, we say, well, in order to fix this, I'm going to put more capacity upstream. Now, notice I said the word capacity. And what happens with that more capacity is when it hits something with less capacity downstream, and the variation causes the inventory to stack up, the big plant upstream ends up having to shut down even sooner, and that's what makes this bullwhip effect get bigger and bigger and bigger. What you really need is more capacity downstream, not upstream, because they need to be able to carry off what's stacking up. It's not because putting capacity upstream of a bottleneck just stacks it up. You need more capacity downstream, and that gets back to frequency. If I'm going to have to use my examples of the Coca-Cola business, but I have a merchandise in the store every day replenishing what's on the shelf. I'm going to have capacity downstream that will keep that flow flowing. If I try to bring a bulk truck in once a week upstream, I'm all going to do is load up the back room, and they'll be out of stock on some things, and they'll be overstocked on other things. And at some point, they're going to have to call timeout and ship what's stacked up in the back room back to the plant because it's not flowing through the store. So what you need is the capacity downstream, not upstream, but it's not common practice because common practice tells people that to be efficient, you have to have economies of scale upstream. And what we need is economies of time downstream. So it's a topsy-turvy world, but it really does work if you focus on the customer and on time. Let go of the cost concept. The thing that I don't have time for today, would be another day, is how you can take all this and put it into what I was calling a smart order that smooths out a supply chain.